Okay, so again, because this is our very special 2-year anniversary, I wanted to do something really special for the teaching time. There's also something else that happened this past week. We had the State of the Union address. And so I thought, in honor of the State of the Union, and because we're kind of at our 2-year anniversary, it may be an interesting journey for at least a few seconds at the beginning of this teaching to look at the state of the body and have sort of a state of the body address. I'm certainly not qualified to do this necessarily, but I just thought it'd be interesting to kind of go through it because, you know, when you have an anniversary, or when you come to the end of a year, or whatever it is that these calendar dates mark, you know, we tend to want to be able to look back and think about, well, what happened over the past year or so? You do that in a marriage when you have an anniversary. You do that at different times in your life. And so I think that it'd be very useful to kind of look at the state of the congregation and the state of the body. So first, I want to just review quickly a little bit about what's been going on here at Beth Shalom. You know, we started the Beth Shalom congregation, at least this one. We actually started one in Knoxville in 2000 or 99. But, you know, this is when we started here in January 2 years ago. And it was the second week of January, so we're a little bit later than that. And so much has happened in the last 2 years, and I want to just talk about a little bit about that. You know, over the time that we've been here, some have left, some have come, some have stayed. Not too many of you actually were here when we started. It's an interesting how the Father will turn over groups and kind of filter through until he kind of gets things where he wants it to be. And so we have a group of people here that has been, some here longer, some here less, but you know what? I see growth. I see in some places very, huge growth. And I see in some places small growth, but we see growth. I think it's great that we're growing and we're knitting together. So we see a lot of that. And, you know, out of the birth pains of the first 2 years, a true family is forming and developing. And so that's wonderful for us to see. But now, having said all that about just our little group here, and without getting into too much details, I want to talk about the state of the body real quickly, and then I have some ideas why it's the way it is. And so I want to cover, just like the president would have, different areas of concern. So one of the areas of concern is individually. Individually, I see a lot of people still struggling. Individually, I see a lot of people who are growing like crazy, and a wide spectrum there. But the body still has a lot of growth needed individually. And so there's going to be a lot of work that we're going to do in this next year and the years coming forward to work on that development. In families, we see the same thing. We see husbands and wives, some of them are growing wonderfully, some of them are struggling like crazy. And we need to start addressing how we can help those that are struggling grow, and those that are growing grow more. We see some parents and children, still needing help in their growing. So we see families that are struggling. We see congregations, and I'm not just talking about this one, that are struggling. There's factions and divisions and strife and bickering and splittings. We had our share here in the last 2 years. But we're not the only ones. There's lots of congregations having issues. There's teachers and leadership within the body that are still struggling to understand their role and how to do their role. And I think that's actually something we're going to talk about very soon in a teaching that we'll do on understanding what's your job and what's not your job. What is your role and what isn't your role? Sometimes we step way outside of what our role is and we get ourselves in all kinds of trouble. And by the way, today when we talk, and we may turn this into 2 parts, but today when we talk, I'm not going to cover everything we're going to cover here in detail, but to give you an idea of some of the things that we're going to probably address over the next coming months. Because in looking at the state of the body, I don't think it's really much different overall as a whole than it was last year or the year before or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. As a matter of fact, I think if Paul were alive today, he'd be mortally depressed. Because he's one of the guys who says over and over, I'd like to give you meat, but you're choking on the milk. And yet, the body's no different today as a whole. Some of you are absolutely chewing on some meat and ready, but some aren't. Some aren't. And I think the percentages haven't changed very much. And I want to work and address on some of the things that have to do with how can we get the whole body to be elevated out of the level that they're at, to move up to the next levels. You know, the government has departments, like the Department of Education. So let's talk about the Department of Education. We have a state of our Department of Education right now is a complete and utter mess. Because anybody and everybody absolutely can and does put teachings on the internet, on CDs, available to whatever format or whatever they speak at conferences. Not necessarily qualified to do any such a thing to teach, but the teachings are available in abundance. And so the education department is a confused mess. And all those of you who are partaking of education being supplied by the Department of Education, just like with the government, I offer the encouragement to be cautious. Because most of you are probably cautious if it comes from the government, but we should be cautious no matter who it comes from, because the Department of Education within the body is really, really a mess. You know, I make jokes with people sometimes when I meet them, and I ask them, how long have you been walking out this walk? And they say, you know, 3 years. And I say, wow, by now you probably have 4 blogs and 3 websites. You laugh, but it's true. A lot of these people out there with huge followings, you know, quote unquote, have only been walking this walk, so to speak, outside of their church, you know, background or whatever for the equivalent of 5 minutes. They haven't really walked it long enough to not only learn, but to unlearn. Amen. And the unlearning process takes a lot longer. Yes. It's a very challenging process. And they don't understand is that in their pride and ego, we're going to talk about that quite a bit today, in their emotional linkage to I'm a teacher, I'm a pastor, they very quickly try to get back into that position when they are not ready. But they don't know that they're not ready because they still have talent. They still can speak. They can still put things together, even if they're not doing it correctly. And so they don't see any reason why they shouldn't be teaching now that they understand this little slight difference from what they understood before. The problem is it's not a slight difference. It's a huge difference. And a lot of the differences are really subtle. They're not these big, overt, obvious things. Okay, so they gave up Christmas and they gave up Easter. Those are big and overt. But there's a lot of more subtle things that takes a long time to develop and understand and incorporate into your thinking. The subtle things like understanding context and framework about how the book was written in the first place, what those people were really doing in the days that these different books were written, what was going on contextually at the time frame, etc. What about language? I mean, how long does it take a regular mainstream pastor of a church to get to understand the nuances of Hebrew and Hebrew idioms and the way Hebrew's written in a sort of the literary context? There's all kinds of literary formats that people use in writing skills, techniques that are used that are not like we use them in English, for example. I mean, if any of you speak a second language, you know that the order of the nouns and pronouns and verbs and adverbs and adjectives don't go in necessarily the same order they do in English. Okay, something that goes first in English goes maybe after in another language. And so when we translate, we can confuse things very much because of the way the language is structured. People are not ready to teach like they're teaching. So the Department of Education is a confused mess. That's the state of the Department of Education. Then we have the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy is that almost all of us are spending way too much energy on the wrong things. I didn't know how else to kind of spin the word energy, but you know, we are putting awful lots of, you know, huge amounts of energy into very wasteful things that are just not going to get us anywhere. You know, there's a lot more, for example, and I'm just going to throw one little example out. You know, there's a lot more Torah issues than just like, for example, the calendar or the name. But I know people that invest all of their energy into one of those things. Well, it seems to me we're doing this series now called the 613, and there's a whole lot of things. I mean, 613, only a few of them deal with the calendar and the name. But yet there are people that are obsessing and spending all their energy on 1 or 2 or 3 little doctrinal issues. And we're missing the point. That's the Department of Energy. What about the Department of Defense? That one's thriving. Everybody's running around defensive with their guard up. trying to defend everything they're doing and trying to get up there. And not only that, we think that it's our job to defend him. He doesn't need you to defend him. He can defend himself. Okay? He doesn't need you to defend him, but that's one of our problems that we have in our Department of Defense. How about the Department of Justice? That goes along with, by the way, the Department of Defense. Because while you're being defensive, you're attacking others because you want to see justice. I'm not going to stand here and let them do that or do this. I don't know. Yeshua stood there when they did that and did this. He didn't say a word when they spit on him and scourged him and did all the stuff that they were doing. He just took it. Oh, but within the body, we're not taking anything. Oh, we're not taking anything. We're standing up. I think we got to be really careful of what that really is accomplishing. What kind of fruit is that really accomplishing? I'm not saying never to stand up, but when you do, think about how you do it. We're going to talk about that more today as well. What about the Department of the Treasury? Everybody's broke. The Department of the Treasury is empty. At this point, you know, we have congregations where the congregations are needing more money from the ministry than they're putting into the ministry. People are unemployed. People are underemployed. People are really struggling. They're retired and they can't live on Social Security. There's not enough. People are suffering with unexpected equipment and stuff breaking, like cars and stuff, or like medical bills and all these things that are just draining the finances out of the Department of Treasury. And so congregations have no money. You know, in the Messianic body, how many congregations have you ever heard of that own their own building? Almost none. But in the church, everybody owns a building, or two or three. And they're building extensions onto those buildings. So the Department of Treasury is bankrupt and empty. But I do want to praise Abba for all of you that are doing your best to give even your widow's mite. And you guys are doing great with that. So when I say the Department of Treasury is empty, it's not necessarily your fault. We're just praying that Abba would start pouring out abundance. It may be, and you may want to ask the Father about this, it may be that he's not giving it to you because you've not shown him that you know what to do with it. Is that possible? That he's not giving you any because you've demonstrated a lack of ability to have good stewardship. You know, some people come to the ministry, and I'm not saying it's necessarily in this congregation or even in this time frame. This is stuff from 15, 20 years of experience. That will come to the ministry looking for help, yet they're still spending money on things that they should have basically turned off or canceled before coming to the ministry for help. Because the ministry's job is not to pay for your cable or your cigarettes or your whatever, fill in the blank. The ministry is here to help you have the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Or just food and shelter. Most of you have clothing. Some of it may be old or whatever, but you can still wear it. But food and shelter, basic needs, safety. Or maybe help you with transportation if that just is necessary for your work. But you know what? There are people that will come to ministry. And I'm saying this not just because of anybody here, but because of the live stream, but because of the video and because of the CD, so that people know what's going on. Please, all of you understand, if the Department of Treasury has funds in it, those funds are meant to bless you if you have need. And we're heading towards a time when we're all going to have need more and more than we had before. And that need is going to be hard to meet if there's no money in the treasury. That's why Scripture tells you over and over again in the tithing verses, do not forget the poor. Do not forget to give to the Levites so they take care of the poor. And the Levites are instructed that their tithe is to go to the poor. And so the poor needs to be provided for, but you can't provide out of a vacuum, out of nothing. And so you want to be asking yourselves this. At a time when finances are worst and the economy is worst, can you really afford not to be obedient? Because I know a lot of you are having trust issues and faith issues, believing that the Father can actually take care of you when you give, when it looks like you don't have anything to give. Now, I have said, if giving is going to make you needing me to give it back to you, don't give it. But that's in the context of you've already gotten rid of everything else that's an expense, and all you still need is food and shelter, and you still can't afford it. You've already shut off the cable and the internet and all the other things you don't need, and gotten yourself to a bare minimum while you're regrouping, and then eventually you could turn those things back on when you have the finances. But other people may actually need food, and you're taking money out of the kitty to pay for things you don't need. And so let's understand that's the state of the Department of the Treasury, which also then links to the Department of Labor. And we are having so many people that are unemployed, can't find work, underemployed. So that's also in a terrible place. And by the way, you should be expecting, if we really are in end times, that the state of the body address would sound pretty dismal. But it's got some good stuff coming too. We also have the Department of Health. Anybody been sick? Anybody have health issues? Anybody know others who have terrible health issues? The Department of Health has got a lot of stuff going on in it. But are we trusting in the healer? The healer to heal us. Let's also understand the Department of State. And this is the most important department. Maintaining and basically having an awareness of the state that you are in. Are you walking in faith, or are you in fear and doubt? Are you trusting, or are you afraid and you're doubting? That's the most important one, because if you will have faith, all things will be added onto you. If you will seek first the kingdom, all things will be added onto you if you would just trust Him. And so we have to be constantly checking the state we are in to see if we're actually walking in fear and doubt. By the way, this is a big problem in the ministry. Anybody get an email from any ministry begging for funds? They're walking in fear and doubt. Am I trying to attack them? No, I don't know why they do it. They also don't know who is paying them. You don't pay them. You may be a conduit for paying them, but the Father ultimately is their employer, and He can pay them any way He wants to pay them. You will never, ever, I promise you, hear me ask for funds. We will never put an offering out there and collect an official offering. We have a box. I tell you there's a box. That's the end of it. If you put in or you don't put in, it's up to you. We will not pressure anybody for funds. If there's ever a point where there's not enough funds for us to be full-time in ministry, I will simply get a job. I'm capable. I've had them before. It's not a big deal. It'll be hard to do the ministry and a job. And a lot of you know how much you appreciate that you can call me at 2 in the afternoon or 5 in the afternoon or 7 o'clock at night or whatever time, 10 in the morning, because I'm not working at some job where I can't answer my phone. But yet, I trust in Him. If I don't have enough funds coming in, I know He's trying to tell me something. And so I should be paying attention to what He's trying to tell me. Maybe I'm disappointing Him in some way. Maybe there's something I need to experience and learn by having the job. There's something He wants to have happen. And so I have to be willing to go do that to experience what He has in mind. Because whatever He has in mind, I need whether I like it or not. And so it's not for me to question that and to start begging everybody to fix it. So basically what a lot of these guys are doing out there when their finances are bad is they're trying to go against the will of the Father who's put them in that position by begging people to circumvent the Father's will. The Father's will was for them to figure out why there's no money coming in. And it's not because they're not selling enough CDs. And it's not because they haven't pestered people with enough emails. There's something else going on. And it's not because they're doing anything wrong. Maybe they're not learning to trust. If they would just settle down, stop, and trust, maybe the funds would come in. You see what I'm saying? And you have to think the same way about yourself. Okay, your finances or budget, is all messed up and you're suffering financially, yet you could put $1 in the box. But your pride and ego says, but I'm embarrassed to put $1 in the box. Well, don't put it in an envelope with your name on it. Just stick it in the box. Nobody's watching. If that's really the problem, remember, there's a reason the widow's mite is in the scriptures. She didn't need benevolence. She had a mite to give. It's all she had to give. But she gave it. And so she wasn't embarrassed. And so why would you be? But you need the blessings that come with faith and belief and obedience, especially when things are difficult financially. So this has nothing to do with my box. I don't care about the box. This is about you guys. in the state of the body, we talked about individually and as well as these departments, you need this to be right in your life more than any other time than when you're struggling. If your health is no good, you better get your faith up and you better get obedient and you better be doing things right. When your finances are challenged, you better get your faith up, you better get your obedience right, you better get your trust right. Anything that's going wrong in your life is when you should be waking up and saying, this is a wake-up call to me. It's not necessarily that I'm doing something wrong, it may be something I'm not doing, like faith or trust or belief in Him. You may be looking to and relying on someone or something else. And so it's a wake-up call. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed that little parody but serious journey through the state of the body. It was a very short little thing, but I want to talk about what I think really is the problem in all this. I've called these phases. And basically, we're supposed to be transforming into the image of the Son. Amen? And the mantra, when I say mantra, I'm not talking about om, whatever. I mean, the thing that we've been saying over and over again for the last couple of years is, are you becoming the type of person that Yahweh would want to live with forever? And that type of person is the Son. And so you're supposed to be conforming and transforming into the image of the Son, because that is what the person looks like, acts like, thinks like, and behaves like that He wants to live with forever. And so you need to become like Him. And we do this in several phases. And so let me go through them real quickly here. These are the phases in our growth and transformation into the image of the Son. At some point, you went through phase 1, which is coming to the realization that there is a vertical component to life. You start becoming vertically focused. Because it doesn't matter if you were raised in a church or raised in a synagogue or raised anywhere, you still may have just been doing it mechanically because your parents made you do it, and you really weren't that vertically focused. You weren't really aware that there really was a vertical component. There was something higher than you that was running things and in charge of things that you needed to be aware of. That there was an authority that you could be pleasing or disappointing. And so you started to become vertically focused. And that's phase 1. In phase 2, we come to the realization that the law was not done away with. Because a lot of us were raised in a law was done away with, nailed to the cross type of background. And at some point, you come to realize that that's just not true. And so we begin to study the Torah in phase 2, the commandments. We begin to study things left of Matthew. And we understand that there's a whole lot of stuff there that we go, wow, I didn't know all this stuff was there. As a matter of fact, you start reading stuff there that you realize is being quoted in the New Testament, that you thought was only a New Testament idea. Like you get to Leviticus and you find, love your neighbor as yourself. Wow, that's really there. It wasn't something new that Messiah said. You start realizing that circumcision of heart was always required. That's nothing new. So anyway, so we start to realize that the law wasn't done away. We begin to study the Torah. Then we get to phase 3. Now in phase 3, we come to the realization that we are, well, it's an identity realization. We're not just anything, like come as you are, whatever you are, doesn't matter. We're supposed to be Israel. That our citizenship is either of the kingdom of this world, the kingdom of Hasatan, or the kingdom of Elohim. And those in the kingdom of Elohim are called Israel. Amen. They're not called Gentiles. They're not called Jews. They're called Israelites. That's what Abba calls His people. And so we come to the realization to embrace our identity as Israel. And we start realizing that as Israel, even the dispensational stuff we may have bought into in the Christian church, we realize not only does it apply, but even if it did, well, if we're all supposed to be Israel anyway, then all that stuff that was supposed to be for them is really for us. Because dispensation says, well, that was for Israel, but this is for us. And then you come to realize, but it's all for Israel, there is no us. Amen. There's Israel and everybody else. And the everybody else is outside the camp. Amen. Which is why it's an oxymoron to say that you're a Gentile believer. There's no such thing. It's a spiritual, I was going to say physical, it's a spiritual impossibility. If you are a believer, then you are Israel. Because that's it. You believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the covenant they made, and you submit to that covenant. You change your citizenship from whatever it was before to that of the nation of Israel. Amen? See, like even the president got some applause. Now I'm getting some applause. So, but see, here's the thing, though. When I say nation of Israel, I am not talking about what was formed in 1948. I'm talking about the Israel that Yahweh has in the Scriptures, the Torah observant, covenanted people. You go to the land right now and see how many people are keeping the covenant. A very, very small percentage are doing anything in the covenant. I know people that live there. I'm not making this up. And a lot of you have been there and you know. They're not keeping the Sabbath generally. They're not keeping the kosher laws generally. They're not doing the holy days generally. I mean, they're just not. There's a lot of Jews there, but they're just not observing the commandments. They're not covenanting. You know, there are those that believe that just believing that Mashiach existed makes them part of the body. That's not true. There are also those that believe just because you're keeping the commandments and or that just because you were born Jewish that you're also part of the body. That's not true. The only thing that matters to be a part of the body is the choice to submit to the covenant. What is the covenant essentially? Exodus 19 says, Abba said to Moses, if they agree to obey and listen to everything that I say and do everything I say, I will agree to take them as my people. That's the covenant. Anybody, by the way, that is willing to agree to do everything he says, he agrees to take you as his people. He just happens to call that people Israel. And so we have to understand that. So that's phase 3, is going through our identity crisis and realizing who we're supposed to be. Now we're up to phase 4. This is our problem. We've just not worked on phase 4 yet. We've done a reasonable job of realizing there's a vertical component in phase 1. We've done a reasonable job of starting to study the law of the Torah to realize it wasn't done away with, and we need to start keeping it, which quite frankly is not all that challenging. I don't know why anybody ever taught you in the church that the Torah was so difficult. It's not hard. There's other stuff that's much more difficult than just not eating pork, keeping Saturday instead of Sunday, doing 5 holy days from Leviticus 23 instead of Christmas and Easter. These things are not like rocket science. They don't take years of training. They're just easy to do. But here's the thing. We get to phase 4 where we come to the realization that it's time to grow up. It's the going from child to adult is phase 4. We got stunted and stuck in our diapers. And I'm not saying to attack anybody, but we're still in that child mode. So in phase 4, we begin to develop the character and not just the mechanics of the type of person Yahweh wants to live with forever. Yeah, that's a good phrase right there. Okay? It's about beginning to develop the character. That's the hard part. The mechanics, I promise you, are not really that difficult. If we are to be honest, if we're going to be completely honest, the mechanics of Torah observance is really not that difficult. Go to Matthew 11. Now we're going to finally open up the scriptures and get to some verses. Go to Matthew 11. Mattityahu chapter 11 and in verse 28. Some verses I may quote to you, some we may just turn to. Depends on how this thing flows. So in verse 28, it says, come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I shall give you rest. Now I promise you the church has probably taught at some point that he's taking off the burden of the Torah from all these people. But that's not what he's talking about. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble in heart, and you shall find rest from your beings. For my yoke is gentle and my burden is light. So he says his burden is light. It's not that difficult. Now, we should all already have embraced through first 3 phases here that Yeshua is the lawgiver. As the lawgiver, when he says, if you love me, keep my commandments, he's talking about the Torah. We should also understand that he is the walking, talking, living Torah. And I've proved that to you on many, many teachings. We can go through it real quickly here. In John 14, he says in verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So he says, I am truth. So what do we know about truth? Well, Psalm 119 says in verse 142 and 160 that the Word is truth and the entirety of the Torah is truth. So Torah is truth, the Word is truth, Yeshua is truth. John 1:14 says that the Word, which is truth, put on flesh. The Word put on flesh and walked amongst us. We know who the Word is. It's Yeshua. I just showed you with a couple of verses in a Hebraic circular sort of sense how you can go and take this whole loop and prove Yeshua is the Torah.
Amen.
So now why in the world would the living Torah do away with himself? Makes no sense at all. And so here he says, my yoke is gentle, my burden is light. So what is he talking about? Well, let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 30. Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 30 and in verse 11. Deuteronomy 30 and in verse 11. For this command which I am commanding you today is not too hard. Did everybody catch that part? It's not too hard. For who? For you. Nor is it far off. It's not in the heavens to say, who shall ascend into the heavens for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it so that we do it? Nor is it beyond the sea to say, who shall go over to the sea for us and bring it to us, cause us to hear it so that we do it? For the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. So Moses apparently did not get the message that the Torah was a burden. Yeshua didn't get it either because he's talking about the Torah as his yoke. He says, my yoke is light. Now man has tried to burden these things, but his yoke is light. But you know what? It's the weightier matters that really challenge us. It's not the mechanics, but it's the weightier matters that we struggle with. Let's look at what the weightier matters are. Go to Matthew 23. Matthew 23 and in verse 23. Matthew 23:23. He says, woe to you. Now, this is the whole section where he's got a bunch of woes to the scribes and Pharisees. And he begins with this one. He says, woe to you, you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. These need to have been done without neglecting the others. So let's understand that Yeshua had an opportunity here to tell them they didn't need to be doing this tithing thing. They didn't need to be working on these mechanics. Did he do that? No. He said the mechanics were necessary and it's good that you did them, but you did them at the same time that you neglected weightier things. Weightier things means that they're more impactful, they're more important, they have more influence, they cause more damage or blessing, depending on how it's looked at. They're heavier. They're more challenging. They take more effort. They're weightier matters. And so what does he call weightier matters? He says the weightier matters of right ruling, which is also could be called judgment, compassion, and belief. So what he's saying is, look, it takes a lot to use judgment. And a lot of us use judgment badly. We have bad judgment, poor judgment. He says, and compassion. There's a terrible lack of kindness and compassion and mercy out there. And he says, and belief. Because you can't do the mechanics of Torah without believing anything. You can do it just because you were raised doing it that way. That's what my family always did. I don't have to believe anything to do it. Does it take belief to not eat pork? No, you can mechanically just choose not to do it. But it takes faith and belief to be pleasing in the sight of the Father. And so this is a weightier matter. Let's look at Luke 11. He talks about the same things, but he adds a little bit difference here. Luke 11 and in verse 42. Just one verse here, Luke 11 and in verse 42. He says, but woe to you Pharisees, because you tithe of the mint and the rue and every plant, and pass by the right ruling and the love of Elohim. So here he's saying you're passing by judgment and the love of Elohim. That's an interesting thing to throw in there. What is the love of Elohim? While the love of Elohim is outward focused, it goes out and is spread abroad to other people. It is the love that he has in his mercy and his compassion and his caring for others. In other words, you don't have that love that Elohim has. You have maybe Philia love, Philadelphia love. You may have, the more eros love, lots of lusts love. So you have that brotherly love or that lusting love, but you don't have that unconditional agape love, which takes more effort to have that. It's not easy to love somebody Elohim-like unconditionally. It's very challenging. So these are weightier matters. When Yeshua spoke of the weightier matters, it was in the context of being in addition to the mechanical observances, not instead of or as a replacement for. That's a very key context that you probably never heard in the churches. It was in addition to, not instead of or a replacement for. But the church will teach, well, we don't have to do the mechanics anymore. We now just focus on these weightier things. No, you need to do the mechanics in the weightier things way, in that format, in that process, in that approach. Essentially, weightier matters are matters of character. Specifically, they are elements of his character. Compassion is an element of his character. You don't have that naturally. Mercy, judgment, love of Elohim. These are things that are a part of his character that you need to embrace to change your character into his character. In phase 4, we develop his character traits. The character traits that will make it possible for us to, now listen now, this is important. It'll make it possible for us to keep the Torah with the strictest adherence and fullest integrity that is possible, while at the same time causing the least amount of harm or stumbling to other people. Let me say that again, because this is how I want you, this is my encouragement to you, but I believe it's scriptural that the Father wants us to make it, he wants us to be Torah observant, Torah submissive in the strictest possible sense, with the fullest integrity possible, but at the same time causing the least amount of harm or stumbling to others. Most of us, unfortunately, because we were in phase 3, which was learning and studying the Torah, phase 2, we got so stuck in phase 2, learning the Torah, I got to get the Torah right, that we were not doing it in a way that was respectful to other people's feelings, situations, where they were spiritually. We were just these Torah terrorists. I mean, after all, this is a presidential speech. We should talk about terrorism. But you understand what I'm saying? We were Torah terrorists. We were brutal, beating people over the head with the law. And we had no mercy, compassion, love, gentleness, kindness. What does that sound like to anybody? Maybe the fruit of the Spirit? Okay, we're going to talk about that in a few minutes here. But I want us to understand that that's what we're looking for. His character is the character of the only human being that perfectly walked out all the commandments in the fruit of the Spirit. And so it's my opinion that when we ask the question, well, what does Yahweh think the person looks like that is the type of person he wants to live with forever? Well, I think it's someone who keeps the commandments and does it in the context of the fruit of the Spirit. And that's what we've been teaching. Let me continue. So my point is here is that we are to walk in such a way that treats all those around us with the greatest possible level of consideration and concern. I'm not saying anything in here that hints even remotely about compromise. Well, if I do that, my mother's going to be mad. Well, then your mother will be mad, but do it as gently as you can. Show her that you care about her feelings, but that you're still not going to compromise. But I want you to come over to Christmas dinner. All of your brothers and sisters who've never been together for 20 years now are all going to be at my house, and I can't believe you're not coming. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I know that hurts your feelings. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I can't do it. Do you understand how I'm talking about this differently? Some of us will be like, well, Mom, it's Christmas. I know. Don't you know that's pagan? I can't do that. No. Show your mom that you care about her feelings and her concerns, but yet at the same time say, but nonetheless, I can't do that. Be strong, but be gentle. Be absolutely full of integrity, but be compassionate. Once you are transformed, by the way, in an area of your character, once you finally have got an area of your character sort of right, it's no longer an issue. In other words, for probably almost all of you, if not all of you, Christmas is not an issue. Once you let it go, you let it go. It's not causing you any more stumbling or problem. Neither is shrimp or catfish or whatever. I mean, once you've let things go, at some point, it's no longer an issue. But there are things that are still issues. And I think we can look at the areas that we still struggle in as areas which are character flaws. Oh, I know that hurts. Usually these are areas where we have the information that we need. In other words, we know what we need to be doing or not doing, but we lack the heart, the mindset, or the faith, the trust to change that area of our character. I'll say that again. These areas are almost always areas that we should know what to do. We have the information that we need. It's not like, well, ignorance is, bliss or something. You know. The information's here. You have the scriptures. You've read it. You're probably very aware of the verses. But yet, you lack either the heart, the character in the heart, the faith, the mindset, the trust to actually step out and make the change. And that's what phase 4 is all about. It takes a maturing, a growing up to do these things. Let's look at 1 John chapter 3. 1 John chapter 3. It's becoming clear very quickly here that we're not going to get as far as I had hoped to get today, but that's okay. 1 John, well, you guys are all used to that anyway. So this will be the State of the Body, part 37 eventually. I'm kidding. 1 John chapter 3. And we're going to begin in verse 1. See what love the Father has given us, that we should be called children of Elohim. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved ones, now we are children of Elohim, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. Now let's break this down real quickly here. He's saying here, first of all, he's calling us children of Elohim. He's not calling us the adults of Elohim, because he knows we're not there yet. But here he says, for this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him. I want you, and we're going to do a teaching on this, but I want you to start switching. I want you to switch out the word know for a deep, intimate relationship. It's not just knowing. It says the world doesn't understand us, know us, have a relationship with us because it didn't have one with him. It's not informational. This knowing thing is not informational. It's not like they never heard of him. Because a lot of people out there have heard of Mashiach, but just knowing that informationally doesn't do anything. There's even people out there that claim to have given themselves to him that don't know him, because it says those who say they know him and don't keep his commandments are liars. So they don't actually have that relationship with him. Okay? And then it says, beloved ones, now we are children of Elohim, and yet it has not yet been revealed what we shall be. However, he says, but we know that when he is revealed, we're talking about at his second coming, when he comes in his full power and glory, no longer in flesh, that we shall be like him, and we shall know what he's like because we're going to see him as he is. In other words, like I've used the analogy of the amoeba trying to understand a human being, we are just like that as human beings trying to understand whatever Elohim is. It's not flesh and blood. Doesn't have to worry about time and space. I mean, there's all kinds of things beyond our comprehension. Now, having said that, we will understand a lot more when we're changed into what he is. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I know all of you were impressed with just how many verses we've already used in the Brit Hadashah. Rabbi, you're in the Brit all this time. What are you doing? I do know what stuff that's in the Brit, believe it or not. And we do have a teaching coming soon as we finish the 613, where we're just going to do a teaching series on the words of Yeshua. I knew you'd like that, David. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 51. When I first knew I was going to do that teaching, the first thing I thought of, David, was you, and I knew you'd be excited. 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 51. Of course, everybody listening on the CD is probably going, who in the world is David? He is my brother. That's who he is. He is my brother. Not of the same mother, but he's no less my brother than anybody that was ever born of my mother. He is definitely my brother. Okay, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 51. See, I speak a secret to you. We shall not all sleep, but we're going to be changed. Changed from what? From this flesh suit, this corruptible, into incorruptible, just like 1 John was talking about. It says, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Amen. For this corruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortal to put on immortality. And when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall come to be the word that has been written, death is swallowed up in overcoming. So we know we're going to be immortal now. We're not going to be able to die. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your overcoming? And the sting of death is sin, and the power of the sin is the Torah. But thanks to Elohim, who gives us the overcoming through our Master Yeshua Messiah. Therefore, listen to this now, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always excelling in the work of the Master, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Master. Amen. Now, we are talking about a physical change. Let me be clear, it is my opinion. Okay, we made it clear it's my opinion, not necessarily from Scripture, but I think it's a scripturally based opinion, that we are not going to be physically changed or transformed to be like Him if we have not already transformed and changed in our character to be like Him. Amen. Now, nobody's teaching that in the churches. All you had to do is make a confession and make an altar call, and you're guaranteed to be changed into incorruptible. That's a whole lot of nonsense. You are not, in my opinion, I could be wrong, you don't want to agree with me, fine, but in my opinion, you are not going to be physically changed and transformed to be like Him unless you've already become like Him. Transformed into the image of the Son in your character. I believe that those that will be physically transformed at the first resurrection will be those that have already transformed and conformed themselves to the works, mindset, and heart. In other words, the actions and what drives the actions that Yeshua did. Amen. We are responsible, this is the key part, we are responsible for our part in that process. Here's a question. Are you resisting and kicking against the transformation, or submissively, actively participating in the transformation process? Are you being pliable and moldable in the Maker's hands? Or are you being stiff-necked and kicking against it and want to do it your way? There is no your way in the kingdom. There's only His way. The sooner we figure that out, the better chance you're going to have of being there. Romans chapter 12 and in verse 1. Romans chapter 12 and in verse 1. I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship. Here, Shaul is saying, look, it's not even a big deal. It's reasonable for him to expect you to offer up your bodies a living offering, to give of yourself, to sacrifice self, is what he's saying. He says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you prove what is that good and well-pleasing and perfect desire of Elohim, not desire of me. But what is the pleasing, the well-pleasing, good and perfect desire of Elohim? Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Kepha chapter 1 and in verse 13. 1 Peter, 1 Kepha 1, in verse 13. Therefore, having girded up the loins of your mind, we were just talking about the renewing of your mind, and now he's saying, having girded up the loins of your mind. Why would you have to gird up the loins of your mind? Because if you don't, it's willing to let anything go in there and fall out of it and whatever else, it's a mess. Yeah. You need to grab a hold of what's going on between those ears. He says, being sober, set your expectation perfectly upon the favor that is to be brought to you at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust in your ignorance, Instead, as the one who called you is set apart, so you also should become set apart in all behavior, because it has been written, be set apart, for I am set apart. What makes you set apart? Doing set apart things, like keeping the commandments. But it takes girding up the loins of the mind. Let's go to Philippians 2 now. Philippians chapter 2. And verse 1. If then there is any encouragement in Messiah, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of ruach, of spirit, if any affection and compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind. Which same mind? The mind of Yeshua. Having the same love, one in being and of purpose. See, people will read this and think that everybody in the congregation needs to be on the same page, on the same mind. Well, that's true, as long as that mind is Yeshua's. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be on my page and on my mind, or yours and on your mind. We need to be on his. Amen. Be of the same mind, having the same love, one in being and a purpose, doing none at all through selfishness or self-conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. That's a huge part of the step 4, phase 4. Can you focus outwardly and consider others above yourself? Oh, but I don't like that. And I don't like what the oneg is. Why does it have to have the chairs over here? Well, I don't like when they do this. I. Each one, verse 4, each one should look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. For let this mind be in you. What mind? The one that was in Messiah Yeshua. It's verse 5. That's where we're headed, is into verse 5. Let this mind be in you, the one that was in Messiah Yeshua, who being in the form of Elohim did not regard equality with Elohim a matter to be grasped, but emptied himself. That's step 1 in growing up. We start to empty ourselves out a little bit. We're all so full of ourselves, we need to turn it from full to empty on the self meter. Take your self meter and go from full to empty. He says, emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. There's a hint for you. When you empty yourself, you take on the form of a servant, and came to be in the likeness of men, and having been found in a fashion as man, he humbled himself and became obedient. Man, that word obedience keeps popping up. Peter mentioned it. Paul's mentioning it. What's going on here? Unto death. Not unto my boss threatened to fire me. Not onto whatever my family member threatened to do. Onto death, death even of a stake. That's obedience. That's obedience. That's character. I want to get into something. Hopefully we can cover this pretty quickly here. I want us to understand the basic nature of the Creator and the creation. Okay? The basic nature of the Creator is the will to give. It's outwardly focused. He wants to give to you. That's why all this exists, to give to you. The creation, he created us as the creation to have the basic nature of the will to receive. We want what he has for us. We cry, Abba, Abba, fill us. But in order to be transformed into the Creator's image, we need to change from receiver to giver. We need to shift our will, our basic nature, from receiver to giver. Let's go to Luke chapter 12 and in verse 22. Luke chapter 12. Actually, I'm not sure if I'm going to try to speed through this a little bit. I'll just read the one verse I want in Luke chapter 12. Okay, this is where, beginning in verse 22, he says, for this reason I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you eat, what you put on, about your body, etc. And he goes through that whole section that you're very, very familiar with. Verse 30 says, for the Gentiles of the world seek after all these, and your Father knows that you need them. Verse 31, he says, but seek the kingdom of Elohim, and all these shall be added to you. Look at verse 32. Do not fear, little flock, because your Father did delight to give you the kingdom. He wants to give everything to you. That's his pleasure. And he wants you to be like him, which means that you should be wanting to give everything to others as well. So you can be like him and understand the joy he has in being a giver. Now, on the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, we have Hasatan. He has a nature as well. He has a basic nature as well. His basic nature is pride, ego, vanity. It is a nature that is completely self-focused. It is me-focused. Me, 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 me. I. It is all about receiving. Let me show you something you maybe never realized in Matthew chapter 4 when he talks to Yeshua. Let's go there. Matthew chapter 4. Hasatan in the desert with Yeshua. See, Hasatan is going to try to get Yeshua to receive and focus on himself. He's going to try to get him to buy into Hasatan's nature. So starting in verse 1, it says, Yeshua was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tried by the devil. And after having fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tester, the trier, came and said to him, if you are the Son of Elohim, command that these stones become bread. In other words, give into your self-interest and self-need. You're hungry. It's all about you. Don't you want to provide for what you need? You've got the power. But he said, it has been written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Yahweh. Then the devil took him up to the set-apart city, set him on the edge of the set-apart place, and said to him, if you are the Son of Elohim, throw yourself down, for it has been written, he shall command his messengers concerning you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, so that you do not dash your foot against a stone. In other words, show how much power you have. You can do all these things. Why are you just walking around starving to death? Buy into how great you are. Yeshua said, it has also been written, you shall not test or try Yahweh your Elohim. Again, by the way, that's almost him talking about himself as Yahweh, isn't it? He's like, look, stop testing me, asking me to do things. Again, the devil took him up to the very high mountain and showed him all the reigns of the world and the esteem. And he said to him, all these I shall give to you if you would just fall down and worship me. Again, he's trying to tempt him to offer him something, which, by the way, Yeshua doesn't laugh at him like, you can't offer that. Because absolutely, Hasatan had that to offer at the time. But Yeshua says, go away, Satan. He says, it's been written, you shall worship Yahweh your Elohim, and him alone shall you serve. You're not going to get me to buy into your nature of elevating self, of self-seeking, self-gratification, self-serving. You know, in the beginning, in Gan Eden, and continuously in our present day, Hasatan has been actively trying to get mankind to partake of his nature. I believe that is what's going on in the account of the two trees. Now, whether you believe the two trees really existed or not, or they were just symbolic, it doesn't matter. What matters is the trees do symbolize something. The tree of life symbolizes Yahweh's nature. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil symbolizes Hasatan's nature. Let's understand, it says the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, number one, you probably heard it means that people deciding for themselves was good and evil. But remember what I said about knowledge? It means having an intimate relationship with both good and evil. That's Hasatan's nature. Because he also would appear as an angel of light. So he has good and he has that evil, and it's mixed, which makes it all evil. So his nature is exemplified by this tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I want to go through something that I hopefully can get done quickly enough here. I want to just talk about this. I want to look at both trees. This is the nature of Yahweh in the tree of life and Hasatan in the other tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. On Yahweh's tree, you have unconditional love. The other one has conditional love. And I know all of us have experienced and also given conditional love. Well, if they're not going to do this, or if he's not going to do that, well, then forget it. I'm not going to love him. Conditional love. Yahweh's nature is joy. Hasatan's nature is unhappiness, misery, depression. Yahweh's nature is peaceful. Hasatan's nature is agitated, combative, argumentative, angry. You see, if you eat of that tree, what you get? You eat of Yahweh's tree, and you seek restoration. The other tree causes strife and dissension, separation. Yahweh's tree is obedience and submission. Hasatan's tree is disobedience and dominance. I want everybody doing things my way. I want it my way. I'm not happy unless everything's the way I need it to be. Yahweh's nature is patient. The other tree is impatient. Yahweh's is kind, compassionate, merciful. The other one is unkind, mean, merciless, uncompassionate. Yahweh's tree is good and decent and moral and full of integrity. The other tree is wicked, evil, indecent, and deceitful. From Yahweh's side, and his nature is trustworthy and mature. Hasatan's nature is untrustworthy, unreliable, immature. I would even say on Yahweh's nature is to have his emotions in control. On the other side is complete emotionalism, emotion out of control, people being ruled by their emotions. The Yahweh's tree is gentle and considerate. Hasatan's nature is rough, harsh, inconsiderate. On Yahweh's tree, you are eating of the fruit of being self-controlled and disciplined, instead of unstable, rash, and undisciplined. You see the difference? You see, when people are acting the one way, you know which tree they're partaking of. When they're acting the other way, you know. If people are acting rash and rough and inconsiderate, it's the wrong tree. Yahweh's tree is selfless. Hasatan's is selfish. The nature of the tree of life is generosity and generous, and the other one is stingy and not willing to share. Yahweh's is outwardly focused on others, others focused. The other nature is inwardly focused and self-focused. If you're partaking of the tree of life, you are satisfied and content. Awesome. If you're eating of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, you are lusting, craving, and insatiable. If you are eating of the tree of life, those who eat it, is clean, it's tahor. The other tree is unclean or tameh. Yahweh's nature is lawful. Hasatan's is lawless. On the tree of life, you have the truth. The other nature is that of lies, deception, delusion. The tree of life is life. The other tree leads to death. Yahweh's tree is modest. The other tree is immodest. From Yahweh's tree, the tree of life, we have humbleness. We are humble. We are meek. Those eating of the other tree are arrogant, stubborn, and stiff-necked. These are the traits. If you're eating of the tree of life, you are fearless. If you're eating from the other tree, you are fear-led. You are led by fear. You're ruled by fear. If you are eating out of the tree of life, you have faith and trust and belief. The other tree is fear and doubt. Rule your life. And lastly, of the tree of life, you are led by the Spirit, what Yahweh wants. When you are eating out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you are led by pride and ego, what I want. What I want. I believe that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, represents the temptation to decide for ourselves what is right and wrong, but also to know or have an intimate relationship with good and evil. Every time we act in self-interest, putting ourselves, our own interest above the interest of others, we are buying into and eating from the wrong tree. If we eat of the tree of life, we develop a selfless nature. A selfless person cannot be offended. A selfless person cannot be offended. A selfless person takes nothing personally, does not need to be right or convince others that he is right. He esteems others above himself and puts others' needs above his own. And we read that verse about esteeming others above themselves. He does not need things to be his way. A selfless person does not need things to be their way. And so it's important that we start to understand the difference about all of these things. Now, I've got so much more I want to talk about, and we're going to pick this up in part 2. But I hope I start to give you a vision or a picture of where we're headed in year 3 of this congregation. We're trying to focus on developing the character, the nature, the mind, the heart, the focus, the approach of Yeshua. What the Father desires us to have in becoming and transformed into the image of the Son. So this is all about beginning to develop the true character and being transformed into the image of the Son. And my question to you is, are you ready for phase 4? Are you ready to grow up? And that's our prayer. Let's go before the Father. Father, we come before you. And Father, we want to come before you just so humbled to realize that it's your desire to call us the children of the living Elohim. But Father, it's our desire to grow up. It has been wonderful to be under your covering and to be nurtured as children, but now we know that you want us to be, as we'll read in verses later, that Yeshua wants to call us friends. And he's not being friends with people still lying around in their diapers sucking their thumb. He's looking for adults to be friends with. And so, Father, help us to grow, to change our nature, to understand the difference between the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to understand the difference between the nature of Elohim and the nature of Hasatan. Help us to embrace the weightier matters so that we can change and grow in our character. Father, we can't do this without you. But we also know that we can't do this without us, that you're not going to do it for us. That, Father, that you want to do this with us. So, Father, we look to you in the name of Yeshua, in his authority. We come to you. We look to you to have mercy and compassion on us, to help us walk the walk together. For every step we take, Father, that you're there, right there, to keep us from falling and tripping and stumbling, but that we will actually take the steps to choose to walk forward towards your kingdom. Father, we want nothing less and nothing more but to become transformed into the image of your Son, so that we can be the type of person you would want to live with forever. So, Father, it's having said all that we come to you now, just begging and crying and trying to empty ourselves so that we can be filled with you and your nature. That we come to you now in the authority of your Son, whose nature we're seeking to become like. Father, it's in his authority that we humble ourselves. It's in his authority that we submit ourselves. It's in his authority that we even talk to you. And so, Father, in the name of Yeshua, we come, seeking all of these things. And we all say, Amen, Amen.